After buying their new home, Bob and Sasha began to notice a stray dog wandering around their property more and more. Every day, he came a little bit closer to their house, until one day he sat waiting on their porch for them to come home. They decided to let him in, but soon wished they never did. They had to call 911 immediately after he did this. "I knew we shouldn't have let that dog inside our house," Bob exclaimed. "I'm calling the cops, now!" he added while storming out of the house. Sasha stood in the living room, tears in her eyes. This was not the outcome she had hoped for when she let the dog in their house. She looked at the dog that was sitting in front of her, softly wagging its tail. Its eyes looked like little buttons on a stuffed animal. The dog looked up at Sasha, full of hope and unaware of what it had just done. "What am I going to do?" Sasha whispered, her eyes slowly filling with tears. She could hear Bob talking furiously on the phone. This dog had to go, and fast. They didn't know what to do with themselves, as the situation was so strange. A dog that wasn't theirs sat in their living room acting as if nothing had happened, but in reality, it had done something irreversible. But whose dog was it? What had it done inside Bob and Sasha's living room? And why did they call the police? As soon as Bob and Sasha had bought the house, a stray dog began to show up more and more. At first, he stayed at a distance, safely watching their house from behind a bush. Sasha had spotted him rather quickly, having a big love for dogs herself. She hoped the dog would someday feel comfortable enough to come closer. Bob, however, wasn't particularly fond of dogs, or any animals for that matter. He had never owned an animal growing up, unlike Sasha, who had owned 2 dogs, 4 cats, and 6 bunnies. She had carefully mentioned seeing the dog, hoping to ease Bob into wanting to adopt it, but Bob had responded that the dog was absolutely not welcome. As weeks went by, Sasha's hopes seemed to become reality. The dog came closer and closer to the house. This time, Sasha didn't say a word to Bob, no matter how much she wanted it. Even after the dog finally let her pet it, she kept her excitement to herself. It wasn't until one day Sasha and Bob came home and saw the dog sitting on the porch that Bob grew suspicious. "What's that dog doing there?" he said. His eyes squinted. Sasha felt her cheeks turning red. She couldn't even look Bob in the eyes. I have no idea," she said, with the most innocent voice she could muster up. Bob didn't believe her, of course. He knew his girlfriend through and through. "It's not coming inside with us," he determinedly said. Sasha sighed. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the dog ran to her, wagging its tail. Bob shot her a glance to say, "I knew it," but Sasha kept her head down. "Hi, sweetie," she kindly said as she gave the dog a few pets on its head. When she looked up, Bob was already inside. She felt a knot form in her stomach, knowing she had upset him. She just couldn't help it. The dog had no home, no one to feed him or give him love and attention. It was too much for her kind, animal-loving heart to bear. She had to convince Bob to keep the dog somehow. She headed inside with a game plan in mind. "Bob, we need to talk," she said, her voice stern and powerful. Bob had never seen his girlfriend so invested in something before. She seemed so passionate about the dog. It was kind of a turn-on for him, which Sasha noticed and used to her advantage. In a moment of weakness, Bob agreed to let the dog inside, something he would soon regret. Not long after, Sasha opened the front door, and the dog's ears perked up. "Come in, sweetie," she kindly said to the dog, but the dog seemed hesitant. He sat in front of the open door, curiously looking inside. Sasha crouched down, reaching her hand out just close enough for the dog to want to sniff it. Bob grunted as he turned around and walked away. Even though he said yes, he still didn't agree with keeping the dog. Slowly, the dog moved closer to the doorstep. Sasha had to keep her excitement inside, as she didn't want to scare the dog away. Finally, the dog stood in the hallway, sniffing everything and wagging its tail excitedly. Sasha smiled from ear to ear, but when she looked around and realized Bob had walked away, it did sting a little. Had she made a mistake? Worried about Bob being angry with her, Sasha left the dog in their hallway, its tail still wagging, and hurried to find Bob. The house was quiet, too quiet, making her heart race with unease. She glanced at the living room, kitchen, and then out the window to the garden. There he was, sitting on a bench, looking like a storm cloud had settled over him. She stepped outside, the cool air hitting her face. She found Bob sitting in their garden, looking lost in thought, arms crossed as if guarding himself from the world. Sasha approached gently, sitting beside him, her voice soft. "Is everything all right?" Bob's gaze met hers, a mix of frustration and resignation in his eyes. "I'll be fine," he muttered. "Just need to adjust to this dog situation." Sasha nodded, understanding his need for space, yet her heart ached for both of them. Bob's confession that he needed time to get used to having a pet left Sasha puzzled. Why was he so against the idea? She knew his childhood was devoid of pets, but the depth of his resistance was baffling. Deciding not to push him, she stood up, her heart heavy, and whispered, "Take all the time you need, Bob." She walked back to the house, not yet noticing the unusual quiet it held. As Sasha stepped back inside, she braced herself to coax the dog out from wherever it had decided to explore. Expecting to find it sniffing around the hallway, she was taken aback by the silence that greeted her. Probably just a quiet dog, she thought, trying to reassure herself. But as she rounded the corner into the living room, her optimism shattered with a single, horrified scream that pierced the quiet home. Her scream echoed throughout the house. The living room, once tidy and welcoming, was a scene of chaos. Sasha's eyes widened in shock, her heart raced, and her stomach knotted. She couldn't believe what she saw. How could a dog even do this? It was a moment of disbelief, turning her worry about Bob's reaction into a dread for the confrontation that was to come. As Sasha's scream cut through the silence, Bob's heart skipped a beat. He was up and running before he even realized it, propelled by a mix of fear and urgency. Bursting through the door, he found Sasha standing frozen, her eyes locked on the chaos. He raced to her side, his own eyes widening at the sight. They couldn't believe what they had walked into. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they looked at what lay before them. Bob's voice, heavy with disbelief, broke the silence. "You can't be serious." Sasha, tears streaming down her face, could only whisper a choked, "I'm sorry." Without another word, Bob turned on his heel, his frustration radiating off him. "I'm calling the police," he declared, his voice a mix of anger and resignation. As Bob stormed off, the dog, oblivious to the gravity of its actions, approached Sasha with a wagging tail. The sight, once endearing, now sparked a wave of anger and disappointment in Sasha. The innocent eyes and wagging tail couldn't erase what had just happened. All the love and hope she had for this moment shattered, replaced by a sharp sting of betrayal. The dog, unaware, looked up at her, confused by the shift in her demeanor. The realization that she was responsible for this mess weighed heavily on Sasha. Anger turned to determination as she decided the dog couldn't stay. With a heavy heart, she began to shoo the dog toward the front door, her actions firm yet tinged with sadness. "Go," she urged, her voice steady, but her heart breaking at her own words. The dog hesitated, sensing the change, but Sasha persisted. It was time for the dog to leave. As the dog slowly made its way to the door, Sasha's resolve wavered. She knew this was the right decision, yet it felt like abandoning a friend. The dog paused at the threshold, looking back at her with those big, unknowing eyes. Sasha's heart ached. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, a finality in her voice. With one last look, the dog stepped out, leaving Sasha alone with the aftermath and a heart full of regret. The dog, feeling the harsh shift in Sasha's demeanor, couldn't understand why the warmth it had just begun to trust turned so cold. It whined, a soft, pitiful sound that filled the room, then bolted out the front door, its tail tucked low. The sudden transition from hope to rejection was written in its hurried escape, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Stock Bakery Sasha stood there, the door still ajar as her tears fell freely. She was torn, her heart aching for the scared, innocent creature she had just driven away. The guilt was overwhelming, questioning whether her actions were a necessity or a betrayal. The dog, after all, was just seeking shelter and love, and she wondered if fear had clouded her judgment. Bob rushed to Sasha's side, his voice loud and filled with frustration. "Why did you let him run off like that?" he demanded, his brows furrowed in confusion and anger. Sasha, still caught in the whirlpool of her emotions, could only muster a weak shrug in response. Bob's reaction added another layer of complexity to her turmoil, making her question her instincts even more. Sasha, words lost in the chaos of the moment, found herself at a loss. Bob's intensity didn't wane. If anything, it grew stronger. "Go get that dog back now! The police need to handle this," he insisted, his command slicing through the tense air. Sasha, overwhelmed by guilt, fear, and now urgency, felt a new weight on her shoulders, the weight of having to correct what had gone so wrong. With no time to waste, Sasha darted out the door, propelled by a mix of desperation and hope. She tried to piece together the direction the dog might have taken, her mind racing as fast as her feet. The streets seemed too vast and empty, as if hiding the dog from her view. But she couldn't give up. She had to make things right for the dog, for Bob, and herself. Sasha's tears mixed with frustration as she navigated the empty streets, Bob's harsh words echoing in her mind. She couldn't believe how quickly their situation had soured, how Bob's patience had turned to anger. It was the stress of the moment, she told herself, trying to find an excuse for him. But deep down, she felt alone in her struggle, her emotions all over the place. Just when Sasha felt like giving up, a flicker of movement caught her eye, the unmistakable wag of the dog's tail disappearing around a corner. Her heart leaped. She wiped her tears and sprinted, hope renewing her energy. The sight of that tail, a beacon in her despair, guided her forward. She was closer now than she had been since the chase began. As she rounded the corner, Sasha took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that her emotional state could influence the dog's reaction to her. She had to be calm, gentle, and a safe harbor in the storm. The dog needed to see her as a friend, not a threat. With each step, she let go of her frustration, replacing it with determination and love. Sasha spotted the dog slipping through a hole in a fence, its body shrinking into the shadows of what looked like an abandoned house. Her heart raced, not just from the chase, but from the realization that this might be the dog's safe haven, a place it sought when the world became too much. She approached the fence cautiously, not wanting to startle the dog or invade its safe space. That was until she heard an ear-splitting sound. The distant wail of police sirens snapped Sasha back to reality, reminding her of the urgency of the situation. She glanced back toward her home, the sound a stark reminder that time was running out. She couldn't let the police take the dog. She had to act now. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sasha looked for a way through the fence, determined to reach the dog before anyone else could. Sasha hurriedly crawled through the hole in the fence, her heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. As she stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, she saw the dog a few feet away, furiously digging into the earth. The dog seemed so focused on its task that Sasha's sudden appearance startled it, causing it to pause and look up, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. The dog's reaction was immediate. It froze, then began to whine loudly, a clear sign of its fear. Sasha could see the panic in its eyes, the confusion. It was as if the dog was asking her, "Are you friend or foe?" Its tail remained between its legs, a stark contrast to the wagging greeting she once received. Sasha's heart sank. She never meant to cause it any fear. Feeling a wave of guilt wash over her, Sasha softened her voice to a gentle, reassuring tone. "It's okay. "I'm not going to hurt you," she cooed, taking slow, deliberate steps towards the frightened animal. With each step, she hoped to bridge the gap of mistrust and fear that had formed between them, her hand extended in peace and friendship. Gradually, the dog's demeanor changed. Its body, once rigid with fear, began to relax as Sasha spoke softly, offering words of comfort. Finally, it allowed her to come close enough to gently pet its head. The moment Sasha's hand touched its fur, the dog let out a soft sigh, a sign of its easing tension and budding trust in her once more. Just as Sasha began to think about leading the dog back home, a high-pitched whining caught her attention. It was too sharp, too delicate to be from the dog in front of her. Sasha froze, listening closely. The sound was unmistakable now, a puppy's cry. It seemed to be coming from the direction where the dog had been digging. Sasha's eyes widened in realization. There was more to this situation than she had initially thought. Peering into the hole, Sasha's breath caught at the sight of two tiny puppies, their eyes wide with fear and confusion, gazing back at her. They whimpered softly, clearly stuck and unable to free themselves. The discovery of these helpless creatures hidden away in the ground added a new urgency to Sasha's mission. She knew she couldn't leave them there, trapped and scared. Without hesitation, Sasha reached into the hole, her hands working quickly to untangle the puppies from the knotted roots. The little ones squirmed, their whines growing quieter as Sasha gently freed them. It was a delicate task, but Sasha's determination saw it through. As the last root was cleared, the puppies collapsed into her arms, their small bodies exhausted but safe at last. Holding the freed puppies close to her chest, Sasha noticed their frailty. They were too weak to walk on their own. With one in each arm, she turned back towards her house, her steps careful and measured. The mother dog, now visibly relieved, trailed behind Sasha, her gaze fixed on her babies as they made their way. The journey home was silent, save for the soft panting of the mother dog following closely. She clearly trusted Sasha, relying on her to lead them to safety. Sasha felt a bond forming, not just with the puppies, but with their mother too. It was a responsibility she hadn't anticipated, but one she now embraced fully, determined to keep the little family together. As her house came into view, Sasha's heart dropped at seeing the police car parked outside. The reality of what might happen next weighed heavily on her. She couldn't bear the thought of the dogs being taken away, not after everything they'd just been through. With the puppies in her arms and their mother by her side, Sasha steeled herself for whatever came next, ready to protect them at all costs. Despite the havoc the dog had caused, Sasha's heart couldn't let go of the family she'd found. The thought of separating the mother from her puppies, of not giving them a chance at a loving home, was too much. She knew the destruction inside was bad, but looking down at the innocent faces nestled in her arms, she felt a resolve harden within her. They deserved a family. Bob's face fell the moment he saw Sasha approaching with the puppies. His expression, a mix of disbelief and disappointment, spoke volumes. Clearly, he hadn't expected Sasha to come back with more reasons for them to argue. Yet, Sasha saw something else in his gaze, a hint of curiosity, maybe even a softened edge. She hoped it would be enough for him to understand. Before Sasha could even attempt to explain, two police officers approached swiftly. They didn't seem interested in her side of the story as they started to collar the mother dog, who immediately tensed up, her eyes darting around in fear. Sasha's plea, "Let me explain," drowned in the air as the officers worked with practiced ease, indifferent to the stress they were causing the animals. "Please, wait!" Sasha's voice cracked as she tried to halt the officers' actions, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Sasha's heart broke when they reached for the puppies, gently prying them from her arms. The puppies whimpered, confused and scared, as they were taken away from the warmth of her embrace. It was a helpless feeling, watching her efforts to save them being undone. As the officers secured the dogs, Bob stepped forward, his voice carrying a mix of frustration and concern. "Have you forgotten what happened inside?" he asked Sasha, gesturing towards their home. It was a reminder of what they had stumbled upon after going back inside. However, everything was different now. This wasn't just about a rogue dog, but a family. Sasha's patience had reached its limit. Turning to Bob with a fierce look in her eyes, she made it clear. "If you don't want these dogs in our lives, then maybe I shouldn't be either. It was my fault as much as theirs." Her words hung heavy in the air, a stark ultimatum that threatened to change everything. Sasha was ready to stand by the dogs, even if it meant leaving behind the home they had built together. Bob stood there, dumbfounded, the weight of Sasha's words sinking in. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple disagreement over a stray dog. He was now at a crossroads, with the possibility of losing Sasha over his reluctance to accept the dogs. The urgency of the moment hit him like a wave. It was time to reassess his priorities and make a decision that would shape their future. The police officers, having witnessed the unfolding drama, shifted uneasily. They were used to dealing with clear-cut cases, not emotional pleas or family disputes. One of them cleared his throat, reminding Sasha and Bob that they needed a decision now. Sasha could only hope that he would make the right one. Sasha and Bob locked eyes, the air between them charged with unspoken words and decisions yet to be made. Sasha, arms crossed, waited for Bob to make his move, her stance unyielding. It was a standoff not just about the dogs, but about their values, their future together. Bob, faced with the real possibility of losing everything, knew it was time to decide. After what seemed like an eternity, Bob finally spoke, his voice steady but soft. "Let them stay." Sasha's eyes widened in surprise, a mixture of relief and disbelief coloring her expression. Bob's decision to keep the dogs had shaken Sasha, but was a gesture of compromise and understanding. She was happy that their future wouldn't be destroyed by a mistake. In the aftermath of Bob's surprising decision, Sasha and Bob shared a long, heartfelt hug, their earlier tensions dissolving in the moment. "Thank you," Sasha whispered, her voice laden with gratitude and relief. She promised to take responsibility for the living room, a commitment to mend what had been broken. Stepping back into their home, the reality of the situation hit them hard. The living room, once a place of comfort and laughter, was now a scene of disarray. Sasha's resolve hardened as she took in the damaged couch and the shattered TV. The cost of replacement loomed large, yet the decision to keep the dogs made any financial burden seem manageable. This was about more than just furniture. It was about family. The thought of the upcoming expenses weighed on Sasha, but she didn't waver. If ensuring the dog's place in their home meant investing in new furniture, then so be it. The money seemed a small price to pay for the joy and companionship the dogs brought. It was a sacrifice she was more than willing to make. Understanding the need for harmony in their expanded family, Sasha proposed that they set some ground rules and invest in dog training. The dogs needed guidance, and it was crucial to start their journey towards domestication on the right foot. Bob agreed, recognizing the importance of structure for both the dogs and their well-being. The final piece of Sasha's plan involved ensuring the puppies were healthy. A visit to the vet was arranged, where the puppies were thoroughly examined. The relief Sasha felt when they were given a clean bill of health was immense. The puppies had not only survived their rough start, but were now thriving, ready to embark on their new life with Sasha and Bob. As time passed, the dogs proved to be the missing puzzle piece in Sasha and Bob's life together. Their presence filled the house with laughter, play, and occasional chaos. But most importantly, it brought Sasha and Bob closer than they had ever been. They discovered new ways to communicate and collaborate, finding joy in the shared responsibility of caring for their furry family members. Initially hesitant, Bob underwent a transformation that neither he nor Sasha had anticipated. Watching the dogs grow, play, and show unconditional love, he found himself falling for them, hard. The man who once balked at the idea of pets in the house now found immense joy in their companionship, realizing the emotional depth and fulfillment they brought into his life. Sasha, inspired by the journey she embarked on with the dogs, decided to take her passion a step further. She found employment at a local animal shelter, turning her love for animals into a career. Every day, she went to work filled with purpose, knowing she was making a difference in the lives of many animals, just as she had made a difference in the lives of her dogs. Looking back, Sasha and Bob realized that the arrival of the dogs hadn't just changed their living room. It had transformed their lives. The challenges they faced together made their relationship stronger, their home happier, and their futures brighter. The dogs, once unexpected intruders, were now integral members of their family, loved beyond measure and central to their story of love, growth, and togetherness. The story of how the stray dog and her puppies came into their lives evolved from a tale of chaos and destruction to one of love and unexpected blessings. Sasha and Bob often found themselves recounting the adventure to friends and family, laughter filling the room as they shared the trials and triumphs of those first few days. It had become their story, a unique bond that they shared and cherished.